interest when it comes to rules is what happened on Friday with the open carry legislation. What happened with Stickland's constitutional carry amendment. If you'll recall, that was going to be brought last Tuesday. I guess there were a couple of developments in the world of rules last week that are probably of interest. So, last time we talked, last Tuesday, constitutional open carry was on the agenda. Constitutional carry amendment was going to be brought. I told you all my opinion that amendment was germane, and that we'd see what would happen. The bill on Tuesday was spiked on point of order. Very interesting deal. Back in the day when they used to do really like paper witness affirmation forms, when a person would go and testify, they'd say, well, I'm no longer a yes on this bill, I'm going to speak on the bill. Or I'm no longer a yes on this bill, I'm a no on the bill. They would literally mark on there, switch position enough and sign off on it. And that was kind of how that was documented. Whenever they went to the electronic witness affirmation forms last session, they have to put out this change position report. And that's what Trey Martinez-Fisher popped them on what may have been given to him as a point of order on the open carry bill. Basically, there were people who went in and testified and changed their position from a yes to an on, right? They were in favor and they weren't. And this report literally just rendered incorrectly where everybody was listed on the wrong bill. And so that's what led to the delay. It was kind of a legitimate thing. Quite frankly, it was good to see that they would uphold a rule, even if it's just for a Democrat. 1690 was the Public Integrity Unit bill, came out, I think that was on Wednesday or Thursday of last week. I went and looked at that one. That was a legitimate point of order too, pretty simple. If you look in the bill analysis, whatever attorney put together the analysis just kind of described what one of the sections did in the wrong way. It's just one of those things that if you buried your nose in the documents, you could catch, and if you didn't, you just weren't going to catch it. Basically, there's a provision in the law that deals with contempt of the legislature. And some of you say, I do hold the legislature in contempt, but there's a provision on contempt of the legislature and how that is handled, what goes on whenever a person's in contempt of the legislature. There's like a referral of that to the Public Integrity Unit for investigation. Well, obviously under the new rules, it would be under this new situation. And they described it and said it only applied to a general investigating committee, but actually you can vest any committee. I don't know if y'all remember the Wallace Hall Impeachment Committee, the Orwellian named Transparency and State Agency Operations Committee. So they invested that committee with all the powers of the General Investigating Committee, even though it wasn't labeled the General Investigating Committee. And so, for example, that committee could have referred somebody for contempt of the committee or like refusal to show up to a subpoena or something like that. And so that bill analysis just didn't describe that appropriately. That's the sort of things that people will find that will actually cause delays to a bill. And at this stage, as we saw what typically happens. It's a higher priority. The bill gets bounced back to committee. It's voted out of committee that day. What's interesting about it is, in the case of the witnesses for the open carry bill, they voted that out immediately, and it was as if there were no witnesses. It was as if there was no public hearing. It just kind of went into the committee and then was voted out. And all of that stuff, the witnesses, the public hearing that were held before, that's just kind of history for the bill. So that came out. In the case of the Public Integrity Unit bill, well, when it went back, they needed to tweak the language in that bill analysis and say, not General Investigating Committee, but just committee, or the legislature or a committee. And so they made that change. Kick it out, goes to calendars. There's certain layout requirements for calendars, and so in the case of open carry, it was delayed from Tuesday to Friday. That was about as fast as you could possibly move it. Likewise, the Public Integrity Unit thing moved from whatever it was, Wednesday or Thursday, rolled around, and then was heard yesterday. So that's what went on. More interesting part is talk about the amendments, what happened. I've got a little piece that Morgan will hit publish on at some point for the Empire Texans website about what went on, but my title of it is Tyranny in the Texas House. I don't know if anybody remembers 2007 when Tom Craddock was Speaker of the House. Towards the end of the session, the kind of insurgent faction that makes up Strauss's core supporters, allied with the Democratic caucus, they've been kind of pounding away at Craddock over some issues, political, some issues in leadership, some issues personality. They've been kind of whacking away at him, and they had the votes by the end of that session to remove him as Speaker. And he took the rather audacious stand that and basically fired his parliamentarian and replaced him with somebody who would give him the answer he wanted, and took the audacious stand of saying that he had full right to choose when, if ever, to recognize a member for any motion, privileged or not. And in fact, whether a member could be recognized for an appeal of a ruling of the Speaker. And it's a bit tyrannical. The problem is, it's just not the way the rules are designed to work. Ultimately, the members are in control, not one man. So, he had taken that stand, and what you saw and what you've increasingly seen with Strauss is a return to that same kind of behavior where it's not so much in the application of the rules, it's in the recognition power. The motion might be legitimate, the motion might not be, who knows, the ruling could be legitimate, the ruling isn't, but actually the power is going to be exercised in the Speaker's ability to say, your mic, basically to turn the microphone off and on. Is the microphone on for this guy to say something, to make a motion, and then for that motion to be carried on and voted on by the body? And so that's what you saw on open carry. Stickland brought his constitutional carry amendment that had been filed apparently, I guess probably pre-filed before the bill hit the floor on Tuesday. So, and he'd been talking about this for several months. The members were very well aware of what what was coming, what the issue was, whether they wanted to support it or not. He had a document prepared that went through what why his amendment was germane. He ended up putting that in the journal. Came to the floor prepared to have a fight. And the thought was, well, the amendment will be laid out. It's an amendment by Stickland, and then immediately, there was no shock. We knew people didn't want to vote on that amendment. There would have been no shock in a point of order being called, and there really would have been not all that much shock in the Speaker deciding, well, we're going to just disagree with all the precedent that's in the rules. We're going to say that open carry, constitutional carry, because it does apply to people other than licensees, is not germane to a bill for licensed open carry, which is what they were trying to characterize the open carry bill as. They didn't do that. What they did was they refused, they looked at the amendment, they said that amendment's not germane, therefore we refuse to recognize you to lay the amendment out. And so they would never read it in the record. So unfortunately, if history, ended up Stickland put a parliamentary inquiry and a bunch of other stuff in the journal that leaves a pretty good footprint on what happened. But actually the amendment itself will never be recorded to history as to having been offered. It's not on, if you go to TLO and look on, you pull up House Bill 910 in history, and then you click over here and you look on the little amendments tab. There's going to be a list of amendments, some that are successful, a bunch of them that failed, and there will be no listing of the Stickland amendment because it was never offered to the bill. And there's really some very important implications of that tactic as opposed to, what I would really characterize as the Speaker himself calling a point of order. Should have the amendment be laid out. The Speaker himself says, I call a point of order, I sustain my own point of order. Which would have been, whatever. That at least would have been within the rules. The implications are very serious to what happened. So first of all, in Rule 14 of the rules, there's a requirement that was put in there last session by, I think, Yvonne Davis, that the Speaker has to, within 24 hours, put out an explanation as to why he ruled the way he did on a point of order. But this wasn't a point of order. This was a refusal to recognize a member. And so, to right now, I haven't seen any explanation to justify why that amendment was not germane, whereas others were. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff they did recognize. The second question is, and this was not challenged, but the question is an open question as to whether Stickland could have appealed that ruling to the members. You know, when a point of order is brought, the speaker rules on a point of order, then you can't appeal. There was no formal ruling. There's literally nothing in the record that says, you know, Joe Strauss says, you know, I sustain the point of order. So, you know, the question when you say on appeal is, shall the speaker be sustained? He might have been able to lodge an appeal to his informal ruling, or really it's an informal ruling, and then a refusal to recognize Stickland on his own amendment, have the amendment laid out. So you have a real question there of whether that could have been challenged, whether he was in his ability to be challenged. So I started off telling the story of the way Craddock, you know, refused to recognize members even where they wanted to remove him from the chair. This is a little taste of that same kind of behavior. It's outside of the rules. It's justified. It's justified through the text of the rules, but it's not in the rules. There's no description that says, well, the speaker can just not lay out an amendment if he doesn't consider it germane. Didn't there? You know, they were trying to claim that there's a lot of precedent on this. I've seen them do it last session. It probably has happened in the past, but there's nothing in the rules that says it should happen. And if you logically think about it, because it's a way to circumvent other rules that have implications, it probably shouldn't be a practice. Stickland was not the only one that happened. I saw Matt Rinaldi post a thing on Facebook. This is actually fascinating. Matt Rinaldi posted on Facebook on Saturday that he had offered an amendment on Friday that would have dealt with the Fourth Amendment implications of open carry. The question of could an officer basically engage in what's called a Terry stop, where there be reasonable suspicion to stop somebody, detain them, and question them about their status as a license holder, merely on the fact that they have a gun over him. This is going to be an issue under an open carry regime that doesn't exist under a concealed carry regime. Right now, the law says, and there is no penalty if you don't do it, but the law says you're supposed to give your license over if a police officer asks if you're carrying concealed. But there's no reason for an officer to slunk you out of the crowd when you're carrying concealed and harass you. I mean, when you're open carry, it's going to happen. If you're walking around open, officers are going to walk up. They're going to say, you know, hey, do you have a license? And in fact, that's conversational. They're within their rights to ask, but they can't force you to answer. And they wouldn't be able to force you to answer under this Rinaldi amendment. The amendment was apparently, going to the offer, it was filed, and the speaker said nope, because it's Matt Rinaldi, because they know that he's a conservative who supports constitutional carry. This must have been some trickaroo, and he's not going to be allowed to offer his amendment. I mean, clearly they're not even reading the amendments at this point, so they didn't recognize him either. The amazing thing is twofold. One, they recognized Democrat Chris Turner out of Arlington to offer an amendment. Get this is what the amendment would have done. It said an officer, if they see you carrying a gun, has explicit authority to come ask you for your license and detain you until you give them your license and show that you're law-abiding. So the exact opposite of the Rinaldi amendment was germane. It was debated, it was voted on, it's voted down, luckily and thankfully, because it's a terrible idea. But that amendment was voted on. Democrats offered an amendment that would have said, they were trying to be absurd. It's real funny to vote on it because a bunch of conservatives said, well, this is a great idea. But it was an amendment to allow license holders, I guess it would be handgun license holders under the act, to carry illegal knives. So I guess if you had a license, you could carry a sword or something. It's a really funny vote because you have about 20 Democrats voting for the amendment because they think it mucks up the bill, and another 10 or so Republicans who said, well, yeah, swords are cool too. That kind of interesting vote. But they let that be debated and voted. I don't know any harm in that, but it probably wasn't germane, and there's actually a lot of precedent in the rules that would suggest, whenever you're talking about carrying a handgun, well, just because we're talking about carrying of weapons doesn't mean that you can bring something dealing with carrying of knives. Debatable. I mean, I actually don't think it's problematic to let that go to the body, but it was a far stretch from what was what Stickland was trying to do, which is just remove the licensure requirement. Likewise, they let Alan Fletcher lay out a bill on concealed campus carry. So this bill was dealing with allowing open carry of handguns. That's this explicit purpose of the bill. They let an amendment be laid out to be debated on the issue of whether in the same bill we're going to expand campus carry but only concealed. So really, in that essence, two very different topics. Problematic in that interpretation. And in fact, what we're told, Mrs. votes kind of poorly for where campus carry is going this session. The Democrats, you could hear over the microphone, they got together in a meeting room in the back hall and then apparently had a discussion and threatened to break quorum if the amendment were adopted. And so Fletcher pulled it down. Now, I don't know if that's a threat that they're going to break quorum and run to Oklahoma over campus carry, or if they're only going to run to Oklahoma, or if they're going to run home on a Friday. It was a Friday, so maybe there's a little more interest in breaking quorum on a Friday. Maybe if we put some tax increases or something after the campus carry bill, we'll stick around and do something like that. So that was offered, and then I guess the final point on this Rinaldi amendment, where he wasn't recognized, the amendment actually was adopted to the bill on third reading. Now, third reading, you need 2/3 support, you need over 100 votes in order to get the bill adopted, the amendment adopted. They ended up getting that. Only 10 members voted no, 10 Democrats voted no. 6 of those are sticking by it. 4 of them put an internal statement saying they changed their position. Harold Dutton, Democrat from Houston, sometimes an ally of conservatives on civil liberties issues, he offered the amendment with Rinaldi on Monday to the bill to deal with this Fourth Amendment issue. Thankfully, the thing was adopted, put on the bill. But it's amazing that that amendment was germane to the bill on Monday, was not germane to the bill on Friday. And I would suggest it's solely because the liberal Democrat was the author on Monday and the conservative Republican was the author on Friday. So that's what went on. The implications, I don't know the implications, but it is a reflection of the things that I think a lot of conservatives have been complaining about with the management of the House for the last several terms.
But it passed, 9-10 did pass? Okay, all right.
9-10 passed with, I think even, I don't know the exact number of Democrats supporting it, but there was some Democrat support that had over 100 votes.
Now, does it have to be recognized? Reconciled with the Senate?
Here's what's going to happen, and actually this is another very interesting point on obstruction in the House. So right now, the Senate has sent over, actually I don't know the number of bills the Senate has sent over, because I haven't checked that in about a week. Last I looked at it, it was between 200 and 300 bills. At one point, there were 243 Senate bills that had been sent over to the House. 3 of those had been referred to a House committee and moved. 240 of them were sitting on the Speaker's desk. He then moved 20, 10, and 3. I don't know how many have shown up since then, but by my count, they've moved 36 Senate bills to a House committee. They're sitting on 200 to 300 of them. It's amazing. The Senate version of open carry was passed over to the House a month ago, more than a month ago. It is still sitting on the Speaker's desk, has not been referred. The only committee that is going to go to is Homeland Security and Public Safety, just like House Bill 910 went to. By refusing to give that bill to the committee then is not able to vote out the Senate version. They were then unable to do what's called an over and eligible on the House floor. Right now, the bill, now granted there were a couple of amendments, so it would have had to go back to the Senate for the Senate to either agree to the amendments or send it to conference, and very likely would have agreed, I think, to the amendments. And then it would be going to Abbott's desk, literally probably be signed this week or next week. Right now, instead, the House has voted out House Bill 910, even though the Senate bill is sitting in their chamber ready to go. And it's an exact copy of the underlying House Bill 910. Obviously, there were a couple of amendments, but that bill, because it was sent over as a House bill to the Senate, it has to go through the entire Senate process again. So that bill is going to have to be referred, I guess, to, I can't recall where it was sent, maybe State Affairs. You're going to have to get your 19 votes again to bring it to the floor. Who knows if there's potentially a flaky Republican member who decides either he doesn't like it anymore, or he decides he wants to extract something else out of Patrick in order to get it, to the floor. Could happen. It's going to have to come to the floor. I don't know if you recall how long it took to debate this issue when it was on the floor last time. Look forward to that same debate to take place again. So that's a Senate day that is poof, gone. It's going to have to go through that process, potentially amendments. I don't know if there'll be amendments or anything. Again, probably not. I mean, they've had one whack at it already. But anyway, that'll come out. And then if it's any different than the House version, it'll have to come back over to the House. The House will then have to agree either with the amendments or agree to go to conference. And if it's conference, then you got to agree to the conference report and then get those things back to the floor. So what you're looking at is a bill that could have passed, could have gone to the governor's desk to be signed this week. Could have gone to, maybe next week. Was really headed towards being done. Is now only halfway there. You've got probably another month before it's going to be passed. And so it's late April now. We're talking late May, probably, possibly early May. I mean, the Senate could move quickly on it, but it's going to be at the expense of other priorities. And I don't know that you can blame the Senate. The Senate may have to sit on this thing until the Senate bill days. There's a timeline for how long you can pass Senate bills. And then the Senate takes up strictly House bills, the House takes up strictly Senate bills. This may have to wait until that time rolls around in order for them to continue to pass their bills. So it's mainly a massive waste of time. I think that was the tactic as it's designed. It'll slow things down and extract maybe a negotiation point at some point or other where they can hold a bill like that hostage for, let's say, spending increases or something in the budget or whatever. So that's what's going on now. I mean, this House is in full obstruction mode, and we're seeing it in a pretty blatant way. Adam?
Could you comment a little bit on what the Senate did yesterday on border security and passing their own bill as opposed to the watered down one the House passed a couple weeks ago?
I am aware the Senate passed a bill. I did not watch any of the debate. I have not read the bill. So, no. Unless you got more specifics for me, and
I just kind of observed that they did it, and I thought that was very interesting because...
Well, I mean, so the bill that was passed by the House, HB 11, dealt with kind of crime in the border region, and not strictly border region, but crime in the border region, and giving certain tools to law enforcement down there. I know that the House's budget deals strictly with DPS at the border. I think the Senate provides money for the National Guard to continue to be down on the border. I do not know exactly what SB 3 looks like, but it is. It would be very easy to have a bill designed to deal with border security and securing the border. In fact, and when HB 11 passed, there was a great exchange at the back microphone between Stickland and Dennis Bond, who was with the bill. Stickland basically made him admit that this bill isn't going to secure the border. It does, maybe does some good things, and I think pretty much everybody kind of voted for it at the end of the day. But it isn't a border security bill, really. The bill that's passed by the Senate can easily be very, very different, aimed towards the objective of border security. It's not necessarily just a competing measure. So anyway, that would just be my.
That was DPS's border security plan. The Senate bill.
Oh, is it? Okay.
On a related topic, the Border Security Subcommittee passed out the Interstate Compact. Well, almost passed out Interstate Compact yesterday with one minor thing that the chairman needs to work on. My question is, they closed public hearing on it. So what I was told was that it goes back to the full Veterans Affairs Committee. They're not going to open up public testimony again because it's been closed. Do they have to vote it out before it gets on the intent calendar?
The full committee?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, And again, I'll plead a little bit of ignorance of knowing the House rules a lot better than I know the Senate rules. But because I think in the Senate they can refer bills directly to a subcommittee, whereas in the House I don't think they do that. In the House, it goes to the committee, then the committee refers it to a subcommittee, then it comes out of the subcommittee to the main committee, and then it's voted out. It's just an additional step. And in fact, when I was working in the ledge, you don't want your bill to go to a subcommittee because it's kind of just more burdensome. You have to deal with these people, then you got to deal with the whole committee. It can be useful. I guess they can be useful if you really want to actually have a committee discussion about some topic in a comprehensive way. In the Senate, I'm not exactly sure because I think they can refer them directly to the subcommittee. But the normal process is if it's voted out of the subcommittee, it still needs to go back up to the main committee in order to be voted out. The subcommittee is just a subcommittee of that committee. So I would assume so. I would assume there would not be additional testimony. The Senate does require, has rules requiring public hearing, but obviously not going to require two of them just because it goes through a different committee. The House actually doesn't require public hearing at all. They normally do one, but it's not a requirement. It's a long way of saying I know some stuff about that topic, but I don't know your answer. Anybody else? All right, I'm going to stop because there are other important